Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Insights and Outlooks on Cyber Ransomware. Before we begin, we wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen are multiple application engagement tools you can use. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can submit them through the Q&A engagement tool. We will try to answer these during the webcast. But if a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, it will be answered later via email. A copy of today's slide deck and additional materials are available in the resource list. For best viewing experience, we recommend using a wired internet connection and closing any programs or browser sessions running in the background. Webinars are bandwidth intensive, so closing any unnecessary browser tabs will help conserve your bandwidth. The webcast is being streamed through your computer. For best audio quality, please make sure your computer speakers are turned on and the volume is up so you can hear the presenters. Some networks cause slides to advance more slowly than others, so logging off your VPN is recommended. If your slides are behind, pushing F5 on the keyboard will refresh the page. Please note, the webcast is being recorded. An on-demand version of the webcast will be available approximately 24 to 48 hours after the webcast and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. Now, I'd like to introduce Ana Maria Landaverde, Senior Vice President and Cyber Practice Lead at Munich Re US. Ana Maria?
Ana Maria, you're on mute.
I think I'm having some trouble with my mute button here. Okay. Thank you for joining today, and thank you, Kristen, for your introduction. My name is Ana Maria Landaverde. I've been the Cyber Practice Lead for Munich Re US for the last 3 years. My focus at Munich Re is to underwrite treaty reinsurance business for standalone cyber and also for any sort of blended cyber programs with a special focus on co-creation and product development. Prior to joining Munich Re, I spent 14 years on the primary side underwriting professional liability and cyber risk. So what brings me here today is thinking about all of the latest trends and all of the latest chatter in the cyber community, whether it's organizations looking to protect themselves from ransomware events, or if it's insurance companies, lots of my peers in the market looking to find ways to best insure the risk, provide services to their clients, and to underwrite to these exposures. So that's why we're all here today, and I want to thank you all for joining. I want to thank our panelists for joining us today, and I will send it over to our panelists. I'd like to have each one of them introduce themselves and also just tell us a little bit about your role in the cyber community, but also what keeps you up at night when you think about the general state of cybersecurity. So I'll start with Jerry, and then if we can go to Mark and Tom after that. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today. My name is Jerry Bissett, and I am the Senior Vice President for Booz Allen's Global Cyber Incident Response Program. I lead a great team of technically sophisticated people that support our clients. We work with small to medium-sized businesses as well as 23 of the Fortune 100 in helping them combat their most significant corporate crises and challenges. I've been with Booz Allen for about a year, and I am a certified information security officer, chief information security officer, and certified information security manager. And prior to joining the private sector several years ago, I spent 24 years with the FBI as an agent and an executive manager, and retired as chief of technical operations in the FBI's cyber division. What keeps me up at night is how quickly the bad actors out there are able to adapt to the changes in security and technology. Basically, how hard they work at not working legitimately. As quickly as new security appliances and features and software and techniques come out to keep up with the pace of the new technology that we implement to help facilitate, global business, the bad actors are quickly coming out with new and insidious ways to attack legitimate businesses.
My name is Mark Reisziger, president of Net Diligence. I want to thank Anna Maria, yourself, and your Munich colleagues for putting this together. Very happy to be here. Our role at Net Diligence is really to partner with all the major cyber risk insurance companies. We want to help your customer really get a better handle around what are their cyber risk exposures, what can they do to lessen that risk. We have crisis software that many of the carriers license from us. We also have data breach crisis plans that policyholders license from us, and they're able to get to that plan, for example, from the convenience of their mobile phone. We also hold cyber risk conferences for industry education, and we value all the partnerships we have in collecting data, and I'm going to have a chance to talk about some of those findings here today. What keeps me up at night is pretty simple. I worry about it a lot as a small business, is our company ending up in the paper because we had a ransomware event, for example, or us having to notify 100 insurance partners that we had this crazy thing happen. We are always, me and my colleagues are always sending around notes about suspicious looking emails coming in. We're a little bit paranoid about it, but I see companies with the biggest and best security teams get hit almost on a yearly basis. It's just crazy. We went out this past year, for example, and installed endpoint protection on our systems. Just one step to try to mitigate this thing that definitely keeps me up at night to some extent. So I'm happy to be here, Anna Maria. Thank you.
So I'm Tom Baker. I'm a law professor, and I teach at the Wharton Business School as well. And I'm a bit of a historian and big picture person about insurance. And in part, thanks to supervising Mark's son, Dane, who did a great project on ransomware, I got really interested in it and have gone down the rabbit hole, including looking at a lot about kidnap and ransom insurance, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And I would say what keeps me up at night is, I'm a student of insurance and insurance history. And, I worry about the insurance industry not getting it right. I worry about the insurance industry exacerbating the problem rather than fixing the problem. And I'm just really delighted that Munich Re and some other companies recognize that risk and are, really working hard to try to do something to help make this market work as well as the kidnap and ransom market works. By helping people get back home safely and not raising the price of ransom. And Anna Marie, I think you're still on mute.
To help the insurance.
Anna Maria, I don't know. Are you mute, Anna Maria?
Yep, it looks like my mute is not working well today, but thank you. So thank you for your comments, Tom. That's exactly why we're here today, is to make sure that the insurance industry gets it right. This is a product that we want to ensure that it remains sustainable for the long term, not just for the insurance market, but also for the policyholders that we insure, and to help those organizations get it right. And so, what keeps me up at night is a lot of what keeps you all up at night. But I think when we think about cyber insurance going back 15, 20 years, and we think about all the various claims trends that we've had, where we are today with regard to ransomware is something different that I'm feeling that is different than what we've seen in the past. And I really do think that it's something that the whole market is trying their very best to understand, to learn about, and to find better ways to manage the risk. So I think there are many people listening to this call right now for that very same reason. So Mark, I'm going to shift to you right now. We've seen a number of trends in the cyber market, shifting from data breach and business interruption and all sorts of trends over the years. I know Diligence does an annual claim study, and I'd like to pass it to you now and have you talk a little bit about some of those trends that you've seen, and maybe talk about what trends have surprised you this year as well.
Yeah, thank you, Anna Maria. So, of all the things we Diligence have done over the past 18 years, this, I got to say, is the one area I find the most interesting and we're most proud of, is being involved in this annual study. And it's a long study. It takes 6 months of twisting arms to collect the data from many of the leading insurance companies out there, and we get redacted examples of what's really happening. I think when we talk to clients, CFOs, risk managers, or the brokers and underwriter community, everybody wants to get a sense of how real is this. We read a lot about it in the press, but many times it's overstated, and many times, quite frankly, it's understated. So this is our 10th year of doing actually the claim study. This past year, we were able to collect about 1,600 new claims from some of the leading insurance companies, and we want to thank them for giving us that opportunity and trusting us with that. Let's see, make sure I'm on the right slide here. Can you guys all see? Just a thumbs up. Are we on the right slide, the pie chart? Perfect. Okay, so besides looking at this most recent year, we also, my analytic researchers like to do a 5-year snapshot too in this. And a little pie chart is just kind of a breakout of the claims data over each of those years. This is very much a study about what I consider to be Main Street companies rather than Wall Street companies. As you can see, 98% of the losses that many of the carriers are seeing, a big part of their book of business is SME size. And how do we define SME? It's in the bottom there. The average SME was about $92 million in revenue. There's a big fluctuation there. That can be anywhere from 20 to $1 billion, depending on how the carrier defines the SME class. Large company, there was a few large company claim submissions, and that average company was about $11 billion in revenue. The top right there, the average loss facing an SME was $100,000. And if you look at the 5-year window, it crept up actually a little bit if we pulled in more years to 164,000. I could tell you this, to a large company you read about in the paper, that's not even something that they're going to pay attention to. But to an SME sized company, this is a very serious event to them. And many of the clients, to my surprise, don't just see one event a year. Some of them see 2 or 3 events a year, which is shocking to me. If you are a large company in the bottom there, it's a very different story. The average large company loss was $12 million. And if we looked at a longer window, it's about $8 million. Of course, whenever you have some kind of a cyber event, whether it's a ransomware event, which we're going to talk about today, or just a privacy breach or business interruption loss due to the denial of service attack, there's a lot of different cyber risk happening. Sometimes there is legal costs wrapped up in responding to these events. A lot of the leading breach coach lawyers, for example, they charge a fee to help the company. That could be an attorney general coming after a client because they had a privacy breach. Even these ransomware events that we're going to talk about, many of them are turning into privacy breaches because there's a sort of a two-headed threat there, not just the ransomware, business interruption, give us your Bitcoins, but also we're going to publish the data or auction off your private data, and now you have a privacy breach. You may have a class action lawyer knocking on your door if you're large enough, but usually there's just some legal costs involved in most of the events just to guide the client through all the duties and notifying victims, et cetera. So for an SME, that was about 82,000. For a larger company, was 1.5 million. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about our actual ransomware findings here. On the left-hand side, we just put together a chart showing how the ransomware has actually crept up over the years, really rapidly. And if you look at last year, the ransomware payments were actually $72,000 on average. And again, that's usually Bitcoin payments. This year, it more than doubled to 175,000. These are SMEs. A larger company, and talking to a lot of the experts like Jerry, who's going to be weighing in on this a little bit, these guys regularly see multi-million-dollar ransom payments. So just keep that in mind. But to our insurance partners and to Anna Maria's insurance partners who they reinsure, this is a big part of the business they're worried about, especially the total incident cost. You see more than tripled to $275,000. So that's all in. The cost for not only the ransomware payment, but the cost for the forensic investigator, the breach coach lawyer, if they're involved, the business interruption, exposure, the whole ball of wax. And on the right-hand side, we tried to break out some of the key sectors. Is that a question, Anna Marie?
Yeah, if I could just add a comment there. You know, what we're seeing is that ransomware does not seem to discriminate with regard to size of organization, industry, and when we're talking about insurance coverage, it's now triggering multiple coverages. So from a reinsurance perspective, where we're concerned is that the frequency and severity of these events continue to rise, which is completely evident here in this slide. And so I think it's worth noting that this is what we're seeing across the board. It's all industries, it's all sizes, they're more expensive, more coverages, but particularly, from an accumulation risk, when you're thinking about frequency and severity combined, both increasing, it becomes a little bit of a scary scenario for insurance companies.
Yeah. I mean, you're spot on. And as you can see there, the chart of all the business sectors, there is no discrimination. We have a larger pie chart in our study. It's literally the Noah's Ark of cyber risk. Every business sector seems to have some kind of representation there. For example, manufacturing. There's a classic example. Years ago, they weren't really big buyers of cyber risk coverage. This is a wake-up call to them. The ransomware threat really drives home why they need the cyber risk insurance coverage. Just coincidentally, I mentioned to you guys when we just logged on earlier, but I'll tell the audience, we had one of our clients also has a peer company that they work with or they know about in Germany, just had a ransomware event a few days ago. Their manufacturing sector, 3,000 employees now are out of work. They furloughed 3,000 employees strictly because of this ransomware event, which evidently they're having problems eradicating. So it is a big problem, and I know Jerry and Tom are going to go into a lot of the issues that happen, but I'm just showing you some of the numbers that our carrier partners are seeing. I mentioned Anna Maria, business interruption. SMEs are seeing business interruption. There's the incident cost to them, about $257,000. Interesting, if we look at a larger 5-year window, it even creeps up to almost $400,000. Business email compromise. In talking to a lot of our insurance partners, I would say ransomware is number one. Business email compromise for some of them is number one. If not, it's a close number two. That's up there. It's a huge thorn in the side. That, of course, is really tied to fraudulent wire payments. Many times the threat actors are breaking into email accounts, very often Office 365, masquerading as the CEO, instructing the controller to wire out $1 million payment to pay some invoice. And unfortunately, many people just do it based on an email alone. There's no picking up the phone and verifying. So those are happening very often within our insurance partners' cyber book of business. SMEs, $83,000 on average. And if we looked at the larger year, a 5-year window, $124,000. I almost didn't include this chart because it doesn't make that much sense to me. And I still have to talk to my researchers because it shows we like to track criminal versus non-criminal. And ransomware event is clearly spiking, and that I would categorize that as criminal. But somehow they're showing that the criminal component of the claims have come down this past year. take that as a grain of salt. I just have a couple more slides here. When there is some kind of an event, the type of data, there's no surprises here. The type of data is typically caught up would be PHI, protected health, financial information, non-card financial information, or PII, personal identifiable information. And on the right-hand side here is the breakout of what we consider the SME size. And the nano sector, highly represented here, all three of them. But again, the average was coming in at about $92 million in revenue. Percentage of claims per sector: healthcare, professional services, retail, manufacturing lead the pack. And then I mentioned early on the cause of loss, and that's why we're talking about this today, is ransomware led the pack, followed by hacker, and then staff mistakes. So I wanted to end on this slide. We formed what we call a ransomware advisory group. And it's 20 of the leading incident response experts out there, and Jerry and his Booz Allen team are on this. I know Jerry's going to cover a lot of these finer details, but it was very interesting hearing from these 20 experts. Their combined experience is probably thousands of ransomware cases, and they work for all the top insurance companies that we support. And so data exfiltration, you're going to be hearing more and more about this. In insurance circles, it's the new norm, according to all the experts. The bad guys aren't just encrypting your network and asking for Bitcoin. Now they're going to threaten to publish the data or even auction it off. So now it becomes a privacy breach. And now the breach lawyers, the breach coach lawyers, we know are extremely active. The couple of the top malware or ransomware variants, one's called Ryuk, one's called Maze, and there's even another one I should have put up here called R-Evil. They're just making life more difficult for the experts, the insurance companies, their clients. You may get a decryption key back, for example, once you pay the ransom, but that decryption key doesn't always work. It can't, sometimes we find the clients are left rebuilding databases. Some of the network is unencrypted, but some of it is still encrypted. So one of the solutions to sort of mitigating the risk, of course, is having backups. If you don't want to pay the threat actor, that's your other option, is we're going to restore from backups. One of the problems we learned about, though, from, again, the experts is 50 to 80% of the time, the threat actors got to the backups before they launched the malware, before they were leaving the network. So it basically left the backups not as a viable option for the customer. The reason for that is many times the backups are not segmented from the corporate network. They're not put, for example, into a third-party cloud network. Business interruption, of course, is a big component of ransomware. To my surprise, I always incorrectly thought that if you paid a bad guy, some Bitcoin to go away, you can resolve your situation quicker. What I learned from a lot of the experts is that's very often not the case. In fact, it can extend the business interruption. The folks who paid Bitcoin, on average, the business interruption was 3 to 15 days of downtime. And the reason for that, they explain, is especially SMEs, it takes them a while to get the authority to pay out, for example, $100,000, $500,000 in Bitcoin. It's delayed in negotiations. There's just a lot of just holdups that disallow them from completing it in a more timely way. If you have good backups, for example, you're backing up to a cloud on a continuous basis, the experts felt that was shortened 1 to 10 days on average for that business interruption situation. We were asking them what were some of the higher Bitcoin payments many of these guys are regularly involved with, and the range was anywhere from $400,000 to $9 million. They settled in at about $5 million on average. As far as a high end, this is a high-end ransomware payment. This isn't just your average typical ransomware payment. And then a final point I'll jump to is the safeguards, and I don't want to cover this too much because Jerry has some fantastic slides that goes over this. But remote desktop protocol, many times they're not behind VPN, they're not secured with two-factor authentication. There's very few of the SMEs, really hardly any companies, are deploying next-generation endpoint protection. An example of that would be CrowdStrike has a product called Falcon, Carbon Black has a product, there's others out there. And then I mentioned there's failure to segment your backups into the cloud and away from the corporate network. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Jerry Bissett.
Yeah, actually, if I could just stop there 1 second. Thank you, Mark. That was great. And I think really what that last slide showed us was that we're not at a point yet where this is slowing down or stopping, right? So we're seeing new trends, we're seeing definitely new tactics. And what we did was we actually, prior to this webcast, we put some polls out on Twitter and LinkedIn, and we asked the audience what they were most interested in hearing about. And on Twitter, they said that they were interested in ransomware best practices or best practices to prevent ransomware. And then on LinkedIn, they said they were curious about how ransomware works. So, what's really interesting is we talk about, in the insurance community, we talk about this as if everyone knows what ransomware really is and how it works, but that might not necessarily be the case. So I'd like to start there with regard to how ransomware works. So if Jerry, you can give us an overview of how it works, but also if you can talk a little bit about what the latest tactics are, what's the most recent trends here that we should be looking out for?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Anna Maria. Happy to address that, and thank you, Mark. So ransomware at its core is just another form of malware. Everybody knows what malware is. It's bad software that gets on your computer and does a number of different things. In the case of ransomware, it encrypts your desktops, your servers, your network, and basically locks up your whole network and system, and you can't function. And you need the decryption keys, and then you're held hostage for the decryption keys. It uses a variety of methods to get into an individual's network. Typically, traditionally, they were spearfish emails. They did research with social media. However, now we're seeing them, as Mark mentioned, they're getting in through RDP ports. They are attacking, monitoring the vulnerabilities that are released. We had a recent large ransomware matter where they used a critical vulnerability, the Pulse Secure vulnerability that was announced in May of 2019, and they used that to access a corporation. So they're keeping up with the times. They're monitoring all the security research that's out there, and they're using a variety of different methods to get into people's networks, as well as the face of ransomware changes, they're simply buying access. There's hackers out there now that really don't hack people. They just gain access and then sell that access to other people on the criminal forums. And so groups are actually now just buying access that other people have. And then once the ransomware is on your network, it uses a variety of methods to spread. Some of the more prolific groups that we're seeing now that Mark mentioned, Maze and REvil, they are doing what we call living off the land for 3 to 6 weeks and fully investigating your complete network. And a lot of times they're looking for the insurance information so they can see how much coverage you have so they can appropriately price the ransom to match that coverage, as well as the financials they can find on the company. And then the other thing they're looking for is the on-site backups to ideally encrypt or delete them. And then they are using background processes that are always running in your computer with the operating system to spread the ransomware throughout the network. So we'll go to my first slide.
Yeah, so Jerry,
that's me. I'm sorry. Yep, I got it.
And we agree. We're monitoring a number of ransomware gangs and what this activity looks like. This seems to be a newer concept with regard to ransomware. It's sort of like ransomware as a service. So if you could talk a little bit about what that is and how it works.
Yeah, so basically there's companies out there that, one, have access to a number of different corporations and advertise that access for sale, or they get in and they steal data and they sell that data. And then secondarily, there's ransomware kits out there, so you really don't even need to be a skilled hacker. You just need to know how to find the information, and you can, download a ransomware kit and deploy it on, if you're a bad insider, You could deploy it on your own network or use it against someone else. And then lastly, you can pay ransomware people for hire. So there's a whole different ecosystem out there and different ways you can do it. What we're seeing with some of the larger ransomware groups that Mark mentioned, Maze and REvil, it's really a new breed of ransomware. They're not only looking to encrypt your network now, though. First, they're getting on the network. They're stealing and exfiltrating information. They're encrypting your network, and then they're coming back and extorting you. So they're really hitting you with a 1, 2, 3 punch, and they're demanding multi-million-dollar ransoms. They're asking for you to pay them to give you the decryption keys, as well as not go public and embarrass your company and cause it reputational harm. And then they're individually attacking corporate executives, both through their press releases as well as through targeted emails. These groups see themselves as security professionals helping the people whose information is entrusted to corporations. And so they don't call the people they attack victims, they call them clients, which gives you a little insight as to their mindset. They have established media sites, they issue press releases. Maze actually has an FAQ section if you go to their site. There's other media sites that are anxiously awaiting information on the next victim. Maze and REvil have ongoing lists they post online of their victims, which are people that have not cooperated with them. They say that if you cooperate with them, they won't post your information. So, you know, Booz Allen, this commercial cyber group, we're unique in the fact that we operate in all life cycles of incidents. We help companies prepare for matters, pre-breach, and build their cyber defenses. We help companies respond to a cyber attack, such as a ransomware attack. We help negotiate with hackers, and we help companies recover and mitigate from these matters. So we're able to see across the spectrum, I think, you know, what is a good response strategy and maybe some less than good strategies. So first and foremost, people need to realize that speed matters over and above all else. Specifically, if you're dealing with Maze and you don't contact them within 3 days, they post your name. Hey, we've hacked into ABC Corporation. They list the company executives, and they give you they give the amount of data that they've exfiltrated from the company. In the case of REvil, if you don't contact them in 3 days, they double your ransom. Secondarily, you need to understand that you're dealing with a corporate crisis, not an isolated information security incident. You know, 25, 50 servers, 1,000 desktops may be encrypted. Maybe you can still run certain portions of your company, but they're going to go after you in the media. People are going to pick up true stories, false stories. They're, like I said, they're going to target your executives. You're going to potentially be hit by regulators once the story gets out there. So you need to deal with the media, customers, business partners, even if they are not affected, are going to disconnect from your corporation. So it's going to cause additional operational constraints as well as financial implications. So you really need to be prepared to deal with all these aspects of the corporate crisis. You need to have retainers in place as to who you're going to call, who's going to be, you know, your forensic vendor, who's going to help you come in and identify, you know, what information they touched, what information they took, what portions of the network they're on. You need to know, obviously, you know, ideally have cyber insurance. You need to know the contents of your insurance policies. How long do we have to notify our insurance carrier that we have an issue? Who's the outside counsel that's going to help us come in and look at what our regulatory and notification requirements are? You need to know what systems and data were accessed, what's contained in that, how much time you need to conduct the investigation, how much time is needed for notification. So all of these things are different work streams that really demand plans and playbooks in place. In terms of a corporation, you need to know what your starting strategy is. And as I'm sure Tom knows, with dealing with real-life kidnap situations, strategies change. Many times up front, corporations say, we will never pay a ransom. But when you start taking 6- and 7-figure day-over-day financial losses, I think that changes for companies. So you need to know what your starting point is. You need to know who your crisis team is going to be that's managing the overall crisis, as well as, you know, the information security team that's dealing with answering all those important questions about how many systems are encrypted, what did they take, what did they do with the information. Other key questions, who's responsible for this? What is the ransom demand? You can potentially get some historical information. How do these groups operate? What do they tend to do? Highly recommend you reach out, as a retired FBI agent, to the FBI Cyber Task Force that's made up of federal, state, and local partners, and establish relationships with them beforehand, and reach out to them during the incident. They will help you as much as they can. Be prepared to have an overall media strategy. Like I said, how are you going to deal with true stories? How are you going to deal with false stories? What are you going to say when the hackers go public if you've responded too slow, or if you've decided not to pay the ransom? Who's going to make decisions within your company? We have seen corporations where we've had the CEO, the general counsel, and the CIO on the phone with us twice a day. Typically during the early stages of a crisis event, we do at least 2 calls a day. In other situations, we've seen it be the CISO and the incident manager, potentially the privacy officer, but not the CEO. An external counsel was with us, and then they were doing the briefings of the C-suite. No way is right or wrong, but you need to try to make these decisions beforehand as to how your company is going to manage this. As insurance companies, you need to ideally help your clients think through these issues of, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Do you have plans in place? If you do have a plan in place, have you rehearsed the plan? Mark mentioned backups. That's a key point. If you are able to tell the hackers off the top, I don't need decryption keys because you can restore from backups, that is outstanding. That's going to take a lot of wind out of their sails. And now you're only dealing with, where I talked about how much time is needed for investigation and recovery, and then you're basically dealing with the media portion of it. The modern rule of thumb for backups, especially with ransomware, is what we call the 3-2-1 theory. You want 3 copies, 1 production, 2 backup. You want it done on 2 different medias, typically 1 on disk and 1 on tape. And you want 1 offsite that you can readily access. And if you do have all of that, you need to make sure you test it. All too often, companies have things in place, but they haven't tested it, and they don't know where the holes are or the areas they haven't thought about.
Jerry,
the next important, yes.
We have a lot of people on this call that are either SME organizations, small, mid-sized organizations, or they are insuring small, mid-sized organizations. What's one piece of advice that you would have relative to an organization like that might use a managed service provider to host their network, or might not have the level of sophistication to have this level of strategy in place?
Yeah, well, ideally, defense in depth is always good. It's a combination of people, process, and technology. You can't invest all in one area. If you can have great technology, but if no one's looking at it, it's not going to help you out. If you're using a managed service provider, one key point of advice I tell clients in that regard is make sure you really get with your attorneys and you understand what is in the contracts. If your small to medium-sized business becomes the victim of a ransomware attack, we often see hackers gaining access to one environment and using that to jump to a totally different corporate environment. But you're not going to find any business partner or managed service provider who's going to raise their hand and say, blame this one on me. Everybody's going to point the finger in another direction. So you really need to be aware of, what you have in your service contracts in terms of how they're going to help you respond to these incidents, what level of detail they're going to give you. Can you compel them? You really need to go through all the contracts with a fine-tooth comb so they will be compelled to, 1, cooperate with you, which is very important in you recovering from the incident and getting your business back online, but secondarily identifying the root cause of that incident.
Great.
The next thing I was going to talk about is, negotiations. If you do decide to negotiate with the hackers, which unfortunately some clients have to because they're completely down and they're suffering huge financial losses, and they've considered the effects of, negotiating and settling may be more cost effective than trying to completely recover because maybe they don't have solid backups. You really need to think through your negotiation strategy. That's one thing we do with Booz Allen. Not a lot of forensics firms actually do the negotiation themselves. We kind of feel that that's a differentiator for us. And you want to know, what is your goal? Are you trying to buy time? Are you trying to reduce the ransomware payment? You've got to understand where you're starting from. You need to have a solid understanding of who you're dealing with. Who is the adversary? What are they known to do? And you've got to understand, the reality of a ransomware event is you have what they want. They want money. They don't want your data and the data of hundreds of corporations. They want money. That's what they're about. This is their business. And so you need to understand that you have what they want. So you need to make sure you understand what your goals are, who you're dealing with, and then you implement that in your strategy to negotiate with them. And you want to make sure that you have the right people, skilled, trained people speaking to them, and that you're monitoring their press releases and their chat sites consistently to feed your negotiations and your strategy. We've seen instances where someone from the company's information security team has just decided to jump on the chat site with the hackers and try to negotiate before anybody knew about it. And in that instance, the ransomware group doubled the ransom, from a 7-figure ransom to an 8-figure ransom. So you really need to approach negotiations very effectively and have a solid negotiation strategy and have a great team that, is going to implement it. And then, as I said, the intel is a key component there. What is this ransomware group releasing in the public? What press releases have they done recently? Have they recently had a large payment, or have they not been paid in a while? That all goes into how hungry they are and how willing to negotiate they are. Recovery and remediation is another really key point. You can't just grab these decryption keys that they give you and slap them on your network. One, you really need to test them in an isolated environment to make sure they work, and they're not going to deploy any secondarily, there's not going to be any secondary forms of malware out there. And you want to have additional monitoring on your network and all your endpoints as you deploy these decryption keys to ensure that your network is protected from a relapse, a secondary attack. Secondarily, you want really good visibility on your network because if one group got into your network, it's reasonable to assume that another group may have also bought access to your network and they're waiting to hit you when you're down, so to speak. And then lastly, with the media coverage pertaining to the ransomware attack, if you did not respond in pay within 3 or 7 days and you have more of an extended negotiation, they may have gone public with some information. So now you're becoming, really targeted by every other actor that's out there. You need to understand how the malware was deployed into your network because there's going to be additional recovery steps that need to take place. You need to plan for what we call at Booz Allen the counterstrike. Have you changed everybody's passwords? Have you deployed multi-factor or two-factor authentication for all the computers? Do you have the additional monitoring? Do you have response teams in place to route out any follow-on attacks? And then lastly, with the information that has been exfiltrated, even though they give you the decryption keys and they give you all the information back, the information is out there and you need to assume that it's available to the criminal and community forever. So you need to work with your internal and external counsel to determine, the best course of action to deal with that. And then remediation, you need to change. Obviously, what you were doing was not working, so we always recommend that you after you've gone through recovery, you need to put additional steps in place and kind of do a program transformation, whether that's additional monitoring, endpoint monitoring that Mark talked about. Active threat hunting is very effective. We highly recommend that for people on networks. These groups tend to hide in plain sight. So I see we've been going on for about 45 minutes. Obviously, I could probably talk for hours on this, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation. I'm really interested in hearing what Tom has to say. So I'm going to hold there, and I think pass it back to you, Anna Marie.
For hours just on this. It's so helpful, and for the people on the call, I think it's so interesting and really thank you. That was really good. So just moving over to Tom now, one of the things that we hear a lot is cyber insurance is this immature product, and really it's not. It's been around for 20, 25 years now. It's just the concept of cyber insurance is that it has to adapt to the technology risks that are changing, to the regulation that is changing, and to the environment. So that's where we are today. Cyber underwriters have really had to adapt. They've had to learn. They've had to find new ways of underwriting and really keep up with this product and all the various coverages that have been added to cyber insurance. So we've learned about business interruption from property underwriters, and we tap into all of the other non-cyber products to learn. So where we are today is we really think that there's value in hearing more about what has worked, what have been some of the lessons learned in the kidnap and ransom space to allow this product to thrive and to make it a successful product, especially when we're talking about ransomware today. So I'll pass it over to you and would like to hear some of your thoughts around that. I think you're muted, Tom. Hey, Tom, can you hear us? Looks like you're still muted, Tom. No? Okay, so while we wait for Tom, just to add a little bit more commentary around that,
Yeah.
I think let's see, did Tom just come back?
Yeah, I don't know what happened, but I am back.
There you are. Okay, great.
All right. So my homework for everyone is to read this book. It's a really great book. It explains the kidnap and ransom business from the inside. And, kidnap and ransom insurance is, has a lot in common with ransomware. I mean, just like, with ransomware, I mean, your first plan is that someone hires Jerry and does all the right things so they don't get ransomware. But if it happens, you want your data to come back. And this is really important. You don't want paying a ransom or the presence of ransom insurance to encourage further ransoms. And this is a little chart that illustrates that the kidnap and ransom market is working in the sense that it is not leading to lots of people dying, and the ransom payments over time have not gone up. And so the question really is, what is it that makes that possible? And the answer that Anya's research really shows is this idea of club governance, is that kidnap and ransom insurance is basically all done through London one way or another. And that means that the underwriting is disciplined. It means there's rules for policyholders. Your coverage is voided if your employees know that you have are told that there's kidnap and ransom insurance. There's modest limits. The idea is that the limits are not larger than the person whose kidnapped family would be able to raise on their own, with the idea of so that therefore the kidnapper doesn't know whether they're dealing with someone who's insured or not. And then, really important, and I see this happening very much now in the cyber insurance context, is that the insurance industry, again, centered at Lloyd's, but there's plenty of companies outside of Lloyd's that are working with them, are able to tell their clients, their customers, who are the vendors to use. And these vendors have relationships with the what people I want to call it on the dark side, and it takes the and the relationships are that it's the vendor, it's the family has hired the vendor, it's not even the organization that's hired the vendor. of course, the insurance company is paying the vendor, but that these vendors are able to be in the situation, advising the family without being visibly, making visible that there's insurance. And the other thing that is has to be enough organization on the dark side that the ransom can be paid and the hostage comes back. And so, that is important. And, I don't know, that's a question for Jerry, really. Do we have the same, when you pay the Bitcoin, do you actually get the decryption key? And then the other thing that may or may not have as much direct application here is that there's a patient discipline process. A kidnap and ransom event with a real live hostage doesn't get resolved in 3 to 10 days. It takes quite a bit longer. And then the final point that I would make about what we have learned about what works on the kidnap and ransom market is I sort of maybe joke, even gossip, but the sort of continual conversation among all the players who are the professionals, not the targets of the marks, but the vendors, the insurers, the reinsurers, so that there's continual updating of what works and what doesn't work, and also that disciplines the insurer who maybe is prepared to one-off pay a very high ransom. One reason why they don't do that is because then they get exposed and maybe not kicked out of the club, but shunned in the club. So this slide just says I'm thinking about how's ransomware like ransoms. There's obviously parallels, but I don't know if there is enough market concentration to have the club governance. That my impression with cyber insurance is, now I've been studying it now for a couple of years using my sort of anthropological, sociological research methods, is that there certainly are some companies that have a lot of good book, careful practices, but there's some Me Too players, and I wonder, is that does that make it possible? What is the adequate market concentration for club governance require? It means there's got to be establish, adapt, impose best practices, minimum standards for prevention, for crisis resolution, the kinds of things that Munich Re is putting on today, that sort of thing throughout the market. And then, the other question is really maintaining ransom discipline. That's, how you do that is not something that I'm going to be able to tell you how to do. People like Jerry, people like Mark, but that there needs to be ransom discipline, or paying ransom is going to bring more people into the market, so to speak. What's different about ransomware insurance than kidnap and ransom insurance? I mean, Jerry mentioned it. There's the 1, 2, 3 punch with a hostage. There's just a hostage. You get the hostage back. There's nothing else they can do. And whereas if you get your data back, there are more things that they can do. And a question that I don't think we really know the answer to is there adequate discipline on the dark side? That Somali pirates were able to, there was enough discipline on the on shore in Somalia so that if people paid the ransom, the hostage was released. If there's not that discipline, then there's really not a lot to do. So with that, I'll just remind, go back to for your homework, read Anya's book. It is super interesting just from an insurance geek perspective, but I think quite informative for people who are thinking about what do we do with this big threat of ransomware in the cyber insurance market, which is the new thing. That was not what was happening when cyber insurance was started back in 1999.
Yeah, Tom, that's great. And I think what I'm hearing from that is the cyber insurance market needs to have more coordination and collaboration among all of the stakeholders, which actually there's a question related to that. And it's what kind of protective measures are offered by law enforcement? So maybe, Jerry, if you could answer this question. Secret Service, FBI, CIA, NSA, any sort of law enforcement that actually helps protect businesses from ransomware attacks?
Yeah, so, you know, the goal of law enforcement is to put these bad people in jail as a deterrent to stop them from doing these sort of things. So they will share indicators of attack that they get from matters they've worked. They will share best practices to protect against this, but they're really not going to give you services or devices, appliances, or software to use on your network. Companies are responsible for doing that themselves, but like I said, they will share best practices. They are pushed very quickly to publish indicators of compromise when attacks occur. If you reach out to law enforcement and it is a situation where the group that attacked you, there are decryptors that are publicly available, whether the security industry did that or another government agency. They will share those decryptors with you, but in general, they are not really going to provide you protective measures per se. The Department of Homeland Security will help members of our critical infrastructure sectors protect themselves, and then the FBI has a program called InfraGuard, which is a collaboration of companies within the FBI has 56 divisions around the company, and each division has an InfraGuard chapter. And those are people that are vetted to become a member of the chapter. And then they have quarterly meetings, and there's an increased level of information sharing, and they will get information before it's released to the general public about attacks, methods of attack, and things of that nature. So they will share information as a protective measure and best practices, but no actual devices or software.
All right, we have 1 more minute for one more question. Mark, we're going to just pass this one over to you. Are there any indication of adversaries moving from cryptocurrency payment to demanding any other type of valuable asset? For example, trademark.
Yeah, Anna Maria, I just saw that question pop up. So I haven't heard of folks, of threat actors asking for other types of like trademarks or intellectual property. I guess it's possible, but what we have heard of is sometimes them requesting, instead of Bitcoin, different types of cryptocurrency like Monero, because they feel it's more private or untraceable, you know, but it's very much a minority. Of all the always Bitcoin.
Okay, I think we lost Mark, but Mark, are you there? Okay, but I think he answered the question. So I just want to take the last minute to thank all of the attendees for joining our call today. Huge thank you to our panelists today, Mark, Jerry, Tom. You were all wonderful. And like I said, we can talk about this topic for hours and hours. There are some questions that went unanswered. And what we can do is we can circle back with you after the call to answer some of those questions via email. And Kristen, I'll pass it back to you.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for attending today's event. A recording of this will be distributed to you within the next 24 to 48 hours. We appreciate your attendance, and thank you so much.
Thank you.